Okay, so there's a pretty common problem that comes up when you're dealing with invoices in NetSuite. Now look at this AP invoice. If I go into this, this is what I got from my vendor, and I have a bunch of product codes here in the line items. Now this is something that's defined by the vendor, and this is not how I've stored it internally on NetSuite. So if I go to NetSuite and head to my own items, you'll see that I have these two items, which is stainless steel screw and plastic syringe, but my internal code is something different. Now, the problem is, how do I process this invoice and get these two to match? There are a bunch of ways I can do that on NetSuite, which is I set up like custom fields. So I maybe go into item fields here and create a new item field. And this allows me to map uh, a new field to inventory items, and I can call that maybe custom vendor code, or I can call it vendor SKU code. And I can do a one-to-one mapping for each item and have the code for that particular vendor. But this is limited because I only get to do this for one vendor. Now, the other way I can do this is use the actual item itself. So if we go into the items and go into edit mode on one of these items, on the purchasing sub tab, you'll see that there's a way for us to basically add vendors. Let's push this to the side. Yeah. So as you can see, we can add multiple vendors here. And then when we're querying NetSuite, if you're using the API or if you're using Suite QL, you will be able to get these vendors back. But that's a pretty complex process. The third way is probably something like uh, importing a CSV. And this might work if you do have like a one-time use case and you just want to import a single CSV for items, and the CSV will probably look something like this. So you'll need to create this mapping of item ID, item name, and the vendor SKU code and the vendor name and ID. It can be done, but it's again tedious. Uh, so what's the easy way to do this? The answer there is use Nanonets. And the way you can set this up is on a Nanonets workflow, you extract data from your vendor invoices, and then you connect to NetSuite and basically say that once I'm connected to NetSuite, I create a drop down and get the item ID from my own NetSuite account, and I match it to the vendor SKU code. Now, what I'm doing here is I'm trying to set up a learning mechanism between the vendor SKU code, which is on the vendor side, and my internal item ID code. And it can be, if it's an exact match, that's great because the vendor has defined it exactly the way we have defined it. But it can be a fuzzy match, it can be a custom match where we use language processing or we look for similar words. It can also be left entirely up to the model. So in case you make a correction on the model will learn and predict the correct item ID for that SKU code, and we'll store that learning. So multiple ways in which you can do this, and the end result is that when you actually go to that particular invoice, you will be able to get this mapping automatically, which means for these vendor SKU codes, I'm able to look up the product codes from my own system and then get the item names exactly the way we saw it in NetSuite.